Hello, and welcome to the Say Yes to Holiness podcast. I'm Christina Semmens, your host, and today I have a wonderful guest with me, Thomas Carroll, who is doing some absolutely vitally important work out in our Lord's Vineyard, and I can't wait to be able to have him share that with you. But first, welcome to the show. Thank you so much for being here, Tom.
Thank you. Delighted to spend time with you and appreciate all the important work that you've been doing, both in your military service and now through this podcast.
Oh, well, thank you. One of the greatest joys is to be able to have people on the show that are doing such important work, and you definitely are doing that. But before we jump into talking about the Catholic Talent Project, um, could you share with our listeners just a little bit, maybe some highlights of your own faith journey and how you came to be doing what you're doing today?
Yeah, first of all, I'm a Catholic convert, converted a little over 20 years ago.
Me
So I
too.
was raised initially as a Lutheran, being a descendant of a German family from Iowa, and grew up in New York. Later on in college, met my wife, who was a cradle Catholic, and then we will have been married 39 years this September. So I came to the faith mostly through meeting my wife and her own splendid example of faith, but also in a lifelong search for truth, and in considering all the different claims of all the different religions, concluded that the Catholic faith was the most true. And
Mm.
I've always been um, some of the church's main moral teachings I've always held, even when I was, long before I was Catholic, the most strongly the pro-life position I've always had my entire life. We
Mm.
also, our first child, we lost at birth. And
Mm.
that certainly is a moment at which one ponders
Mhm.
why we were here and who created us and what the meaning of life is. And so I started kind of a more focused deliberation on faith and my place in the world after that experience, which was quite a dramatic moment for both me and my wife. And then we
Mm.
now have, afterwards, we had two children, um, both boys, and have enjoyed raising them in the faith.
Mm. I can only imagine the difficulty and the challenge that was. But it's obvious that you continue to persevere in your faith, the two of you. And our Lord has definitely put you in a very important place right now. So I know one of the previous jobs, actually most recent for you, was as superintendent of schools in the Archdiocese of Boston, and that kind of led into the work that you're doing. But how do you kind of get to there? Where has your background always been education?
Oh yeah, my initially when I was in college, I was a political science major, both undergraduate and graduate. Had a job in the New York State Legislature. Born and raised in New York on Long Island, and then eventually ran a think tank on economic issues. Worked for Governor Pataki when he was governor of New York, handling regulatory issues. Only later on did I get into educational issues. Helped get the New York State charter school law through over the objections of the teachers union. It actually was the first major defeat on the floor of the legislature that the teachers unions, since the advent of them in New York, had ever suffered. But it was also the first taste of people for kind of school choice being provided to parents. And then always with the goal to kind of push it a little further. I ran a network of charter schools for a time, ran a few Catholic scholarship funds, and then lobbied with Cardinal Dolan in New York and others in New York and around the country on school choice, which was what I was doing when the opening came up in Boston. So I had done schools, if you will. I did scholarships. I understood the importance of having options out there for parents. And I understood pretty deeply, I think, what the concerns were of parents about what the options that were, right, even religious options. And so I just thought it would be an interesting thing to, rather than just talk about what was wrong with Catholic education, actually take the job of being in charge of one of the largest Catholic school systems, the eighth largest Catholic school system in the country, about 32,000 kids, over 3,000 employees. And we had at the time about 100 schools across a pretty gigantic geographic territory, bounded on
Mhm.
the south by Plymouth, Massachusetts, as in the Mayflower, and then running up several hours to get to the border, New Hampshire, and then about an hour from Boston Harbor, or Harbor, as they say in Boston, going westward for about an hour. So geographically, the largest school district in the Massachusetts, and in terms of student count, the largest number of students of any school district other than Boston Public Schools. And in the time that I was there, Boston Public Schools has lost a lot of kids. And for the first time, we've been stabilized, and we got a lot of new kids during COVID because we were open and the other team, so to speak, was closed. And so it's been an amazing experience for me, both spiritually, even though Boston is one of the most secular places in the country. My personal faith journey has been magnified every day that I spent there. Boston has some of the most incredible priests. And I argue when I recruit people to Boston, I think it's actually paradoxically a great place to deepen one's faith. And so it's probably you wouldn't expect people to say they went to Boston to become more faithful. But that's how it's worked out for me. I've met some of the most spectacular priests. We run seminaries that have been cleaned up by Cardinal O'Malley. Cardinal O'Malley speaks 8 languages fluently, and is just it's a Franciscan who's very prayerful and holy. Has been an amazing leader of that diocese, and came in obviously 20 some odd years ago to clean up after the somewhat notorious sex abuse scandal in Boston. But he's been an amazing person, has an amazing team of people there. So we've done a lot of good there. But one of the quick things I learned is that a lot of the schools were not as rigorous as they needed to be. And also, a lot of the people that worked in the Catholic schools uh, were not all on mission, if you will. And so, if
Mhm.
you want, I can kind of go into what I mean by that.
Mhm.
But so the biggest focus I've had, other than stabilizing the the school system in terms of enrollment and finances, is strengthening the Catholic identity of all of our schools. And the core of that was the focus on recruiting and cultivating talent.
Mhm. Yeah, it's something where when you made mention of Cardinal O'Malley, and what I have seen is that when you have a leader who is praying and is being faithful to walking his journey, then it just cultivates that exact same attitude, atmosphere, and encouragement, and also expectation that this is what I'm supposed to be doing too. And that just, continues to filter down. That was a huge part of my experience within the military, and then also it has been my experience also within ministry as well. And so, no, it doesn't sound that unusual that you would go to Boston, a secular city, and you would become, your faith journey would be deepened in the midst of it, particularly when you have leaders like Cardinal O'Malley that are there. So, you made mention about what is it to be on mission, and I think in light, especially, we were talking before we got on about the National Eucharistic Congress and the revival that's been going on and is continuing. Um, what is it to be on mission? Go ahead and get into that a little bit.
Yeah, and a school perspective, the first question that anybody who works in a Catholic school, or anybody wants to enroll their child in a Catholic school, is what exactly are we trying to accomplish here? And
Mm,
it seems to me, um, an obvious point to me, although it's been controversial, much to my amazement, that the primary purpose of a Catholic school is to draw children closer to God and set them
mhm.
on the path to eternal salvation. We do
Amen.
lots of other things. We teach them how to sit quietly in rows and follow instructions and behave themselves. It's the one thing Catholic schools are expert at, and which was actually handy during COVID. But at the end of the day, if we get everything else right, but they lose their souls, that's not a good day at the office. And
Mhm.
so I've replaced while I was there 75% of the parochial school principals, and used a very strict religious litmus test for all the people that would be considered as the replacements for the people that moved on for one reason or the other. And so it's the largest intentional turnover, the leadership of a Catholic school system of anywhere in the country. That's
Mhm.
part one. Part two, I evaluated, had outside evaluators evaluate the Catholic identity or the Catholicity of every single school in the archdiocese that the diocese directly controlled. Obviously, we don't have control of independent religious order schools, but all the schools that were diocesan schools, we evaluated. And that was really important to find out kind of the state of play of what was going on. And then I quickly just figured out that it was very difficult for principals who are extremely busy to do a really good job at recruiting because they simply can't get on a plane and go
Mhm.
zigzagging around the country to find the best talent, the most faithful people to hire. And so they have an over reliance on the local network of education schools. And
Mhm.
so it makes sense on the face if you're looking for a teacher, you would go to a teacher's college to find them.
Right.
But before you do that, you have to think what's the market for a teacher's college? And it really is public schools because most of the people who teach in public schools. And the
Mhm.
public schools have a completely different lens than Catholic schools should, obviously, right? Or it
Yeah.
seems obvious to me.
Yeah.
And so when you hire a bunch of people who have been trained as if they were everybody was going to work in a public school, and you don't have any sense of Catholic anthropology, you don't have a Catholic worldview, you don't have a desire to pass on the Catholic intellectual tradition, then you have to be really careful about what you're going to get. That we've had some spectacular teachers come out of education school, but we've also had every time I got a phone call from a parent wanting to know why a teacher was being overly political in the classroom or they're prattling on
Mhm.
about one new cause of the day or whatever, scratch the surface. And it's almost always a new teacher coming fresh out of education school.
Mhm.
And so I came to the conclusion that the best way to do talent in a Catholic school, not the only way, but certainly a key way, is to find people when they come straight out of college. And then at that point, they're somewhat of a clean slate. But
Mhm.
assuming I'm screening for that they're incredibly faithful Catholics, that they have a deep interior life, that they're intelligent, that they're intellectually curious, and they have a work ethic. That gives me a lot to work with. And then I train them over the summer in a new tech teacher academy that we developed. And then we deploy them in the schools. And then we hire a bunch of experienced former teachers to be their mentors just on the actual day-to-day craft of, how do you manage a classroom? How do you write lesson plans and all that kind of stuff? But
Mhm.
all of our instruction is, done through a Catholic lens. We also, from the point at which they show up, we give a considerable amount of attention, not just to their formation as educators, but their formation as Catholics. And
Mhm.
so we provide not just through the new teacher academy, but for, in a sense, eternity, ongoing spiritual formation. So I recommend what churches that I think are a good fit for them. I line up spiritual directors. We put them in small groups to do spiritual readings all the time. And we encourage all of them to live together as roommates because Boston's a pretty expensive city. I joke. Even I have a roommate, just happens to be my wife. But if you're in any city that's expensive, certainly like New York or San Francisco or Austin or whatever, there you have to have roommates. But rather than having random roommates, we suggest that
Mhm.
they get roommates that are part of my program, which is called St. Thomas More Teaching Fellows. And the idea there is it creates a faith community within their household. And then it also gives them somebody to go to mass with, somebody to go to Eucharistic adoration.
Mhm.
And then depending on whether they like the traditional Latin mass or whatever their particular practices are, they'll have people that share kind of the have similar prayer lives that they can work on deepening their faith together. And then
Mhm.
we've also gotten even some of the professors, our seminaries in Boston are fabulous now. They were a little
Mhm.
shaky before how they showed up, but they're fabulous now. And so we've had some of the top seminary professors agree to be spiritual directors for
Mm.
kids who are like 22, 23, 24 years old. So they're getting an incredible experience. And when they come here, we now have 50 fellows and we're recruiting even more this fall. They have an automatic group of friends. So we recruit, for example, I should point out, we get a lot of them out of the Catholic colleges recommended by the Cardinal Newman Society.
Mhm.
So kind of your more uh, high octane from a religious perspective, Catholic colleges. But I also recruit out of secular colleges, including Ivy League colleges. So I've
Mhm.
recruited out of Princeton, Harvard, MIT, UPenn, Duke, and so forth,
Mhm.
Cornell. And when we go into those schools, I have to be obviously a lot more discriminating in the sense that I could interview 100 people and only have one that I might do a follow-up interview with. Where
Right.
like Thomas Aquinas College, I've literally
Mhm.
offered that I'll hire any graduate of that school. Even I will interview them, but even without an interview, I would
Mhm.
hire their entire graduating senior class.
Mhm.
So, and there are other colleges I like also. We've recruited a lot at a Christendom College in
Yes.
Franciscan. I've
Mhm.
recruited a lot of people to be school leaders out of Franciscan. I've
Mhm.
recruited people to be school counselors out of Franciscan, Divine Mercy University. But at the other schools that are secular, and some of the big name Catholic colleges, of which not all Catholic parents are thrilled with who they have as graduation speakers, on almost all of their campuses, there's usually a philosophy professor, a theology professor, or a Newman Center, or a focused missionaries, or a chaplain like Roger Landry. It's now the chaplain at
Mhm.
Columbia. So he's a friend. So we end up getting a fourth grade Spanish teacher, a guy who the only reason I knew about him is because he was referred by Roger Landry.
Mm.
So at every school, no matter what the politics of the school or what their educational approach, there's so many fabulous Catholic lay apostolates. We generally find people that can navigate those difficult campuses and find somebody who has the missionary zeal that we're looking for. The one thing I don't look for is whether people know how to teach. I can teach people how to teach. I have thousands of teachers, so I got plenty of people to teach that. But I can't teach people to believe in God. Obviously, people do over time. Like I became a convert, right? But I can't hire somebody in May and convert them by September. I
Right.
can't. I can't turn somebody who at 22 who doesn't open a book and suddenly make them intellectually curious. And I can't take a kid who hasn't got all the way to age 22 and 23 and never had a job and assume that they have a work ethic. So
Mhm.
the things that I can't teach, but they have to demonstrate by that age, that's what I hire for. Everything that's teachable, I'll take care of after that. And so I'm flipping the script on what the qualities are we're looking for. And
Mhm.
so as a result, we're putting them in schools and one by one, schools that even though they're called Saint something or other on the end on the face of the building, they frankly have been run like public schools for many years. And so we're basically
Mhm.
bringing back religion to those schools and making them more full-throated Catholic schools, which
Mhm.
is what the parents are looking for and what they deserve. There's a little brand confusion around just because something's called a Catholic school doesn't mean it's devoutly Catholic.
Mhm.
So it starts with getting the right leadership and getting the right people, classroom by classroom by classroom. One quote, I'll give you Pope Paul VI once said
Yeah.
in 1975, modern man more willingly listens to witnesses than to teachers. And if he
Mhm.
listens to teachers, it's because they're witnesses. So
Amen.
that's what animates everything we did in Boston is we need to put a witness in every single classroom. And
Mm.
then my new venture, which we could talk about in a few minutes, is taking the lessons I learned in Boston, including some of the difficulties and challenges, but also our successes, and understanding that the challenges Boston faced are faced probably every diocese in the country, maybe with the exception of Lincoln, Nebraska. And so there's a lot to be learned with going to one of the most secular parts of the country and trying to turn it around on behalf of God that could be applied all across the country.
Mm. How very true. I know within our own diocese, and Diocese of Birmingham, I know that they've been doing a lot of this work of Catholic identity, and this is not to speak badly, about our schools, but the great challenge has been in finding faithful Catholics who are willing to step into the education field, and particularly in leading the schools. And it is a difficult road, but you're absolutely right. Having the right leadership and then putting the proper teachers into each of the classrooms is absolutely key. Just a quick question, because I can tell you right now, if I had been graduating, and after I got my master's degree, was looking for a job, and this was going on, and I knew about it, I would have been there. Just would have been like, hey, where can I sign up? But is there a precedent for what it is that you're seeking to do, especially in sharing the lessons across the country about the success that you have had? Is there a precedent for that? Because I know that that's been, fits and starts. There's definitely not a one size fits all within
Sure.
Catholic world.
So I think the two organizations that I think it's analogous to, but for slightly different purpose. One is sometimes I jokingly refer to it as a Catholic Peace Corps.
Mm,
And the reason I
mhm,
say that is I'm looking for people. I'm not looking for people who want to be teachers narrowly. I'm looking for people who have missionary zeal. I'm looking for people who want to save the souls of an entire generation. If that's your orientation, then my next job is to convince you that teaching is perhaps the best way to do that. But I'm
mhm,
not just looking merely for teachers, okay? Because somebody could be a great teacher, but not necessarily be interested in kind of the missionary side of what I'm talking about. I
mhm,
also call it sometimes the Catholic Teach for America, because
mhm,
Teach for America brought a lot of kind of the best and brightest graduates of college straight out of college. And they were in turn, based on the Peace Corps, which is to basically say to them that you haven't figured out, you might not have figured out what you want to do with your life, but you do
mhm,
have this passion, you have the intelligence and drive and a lot of talent. And why don't you take a couple years and try this? And if
mhm,
nothing else, you'll be a great teacher for these kids. It'll be a great formative experience for you, and then you can figure out what you want to do for the rest of your life. So in our case, for the St. Thomas More Teaching Fellows, we invite people to come initially to Boston for a 2 year period. Excuse me, it's not a legal requirement that's 2 years, but just kind of a handshake agreement because we're spending a fair amount of money and time on them, and I'm going
mhm,
in and out of there. Even though I'm overseeing a very large system, I'm going in and out of the classrooms taught by fellows all the time. So if we're going to spend that kind of concentrated effort on these people, I'm going to fly all over the country to recruit them. I don't want them to come in and leave 30 days later. And
right.
then so I think those are the two organizations that started as an idea, in both cases looking for people who had kind of missionary zeal, and then became nationwide or recruited nationwide for what became very large and lasting programs.
Mhm,
At the higher education level, the closest analogy would be Focus and the
mhm,
missionaries they put on college campus after college campus. First few years, they were in, three, four, five dioceses,
mhm,
and then they exploded. Now they're in, hundreds of locations.
right.
And they don't only go to faithful schools. In fact, most of
Mhm,
the people are in secular schools in which they're organizing, they're creating a safe space, if you will. That phrase has been means lots of things these days, but they've created a kind of a Catholic community, and they try to get people literally the moment they show up with their parents' station wagon and get them, involved in Catholic activities and working on them in small groups, and everybody when they show up on a campus is looking to be part of a community. In
mhm,
many ways, what your future is depends a lot on, a lot of people have said you can judge somebody's future by their five best friends. That's
mhm,
certainly, the case at college if people get in with the wrong crowd. But the analog of that is that they get in with the right crowd and they get in with a bunch of faithful people, and that's their peer group. It can make a big difference.
mhm,
I
mhm,
love Focus. I think there's a lot there to emulate. My only concern is most kids are losing their faith before they get to college. A lot of
yep,
people think they're losing in college because there've been studies showing that a lot of kids go to church, when they're in high school, and
mm,
by the end of college they don't. But that's really measuring as coercion. Their mom can force them to go while they're still living at home. Once
yeah,
they're not living at home, but they've mentally checked out on religion long time before that.
mhm,
So for people that are raised Catholics, by age 13,
yep,
50% of these kids who started out in a Catholic family are no longer Catholic. And
mhm,
then by 18, it's a staggering 86%. So
right,
most of the people we've already lost. Now, the amazing thing about that is if a lot of the people we have in the Boston Catholic schools, we offer preschool also. They come to us when they're 3 years old, and we have them until high school graduation. If you add up all of those days and all of those years, it comes out to we have them more than 16,000 waking hours.
Mm,
That's incredible. So this isn't about an elevator sales pitch. We're trying to convince kids of the virtues of Catholicism, in 2 minutes. We have
mhm,
an unbelievable amount of time. That's more waking hours than parents have their kids
right.
because they're spending most of their day at school. They come home, there's, dinner time, and then, you got to do your homework and might goof off with your brothers and sisters for a little bit. And,
Mhm,
there's just not, might have some work you have to do for your parents. So there isn't a lot of time left over if you've got, particularly the larger the household is, the parents' attention split up a bunch of different ways. Excuse me. So it's really important that the school side for people who put their kids in Catholic schools, that the schools are really working in partnership with faithful parents to get their kids across the finish line. And
mhm,
if you can get them to the end of 12th grade with their faith intact, and then you could hand them over either to a Catholic school like a Thomas Aquinas or Franciscan or what have you. University of Dallas would be another one.
mhm,
Or if you're end up sending them to a state school or some other secular school or a fancy Ivy League school, if you could hand them over to a Focus or a Newman Center or what have you on those campuses, or the Witherspoon Institute or the Thomistic Institutes or what have you, if you could hand them over to those groups of people, literally when they show up at college, there's a very good chance your kid will get all the way to the end of college with their faith intact. There's also a very good chance that if they keep doing that, that they're going to end up, it's going to be easier for them to find their soulmate. And it's
mhm,
it's extremely difficult if somebody hasn't found their soulmate by the end of college, to find somebody. Like you could go to, I joke to kids, like you could go to 1,000 bars. The chance you're going to meet a man or a woman you want to marry who would raise your children in virtue as Catholics the way that you want them to is pretty close to zero. And
yeah,
so I don't care how many, apps you go on or what have you. And so, the big time is college. But after that, one of the things, and I just last weekend went to a wedding of two St. Thomas More teaching fellows. So
mhm.
eventually, when these people start having kids, I joke when they get older, I'm going to go up to them and say, "You literally wouldn't exist if we didn't create the St. Thomas More teaching fellow." Because we're having this, because when you bring a bunch of faithful young people together, I don't do matchmaking. I think it's a fool's errand. But, like everybody in our group is kind of pre-qualified. Like everybody believes,
Mhm,
everybody's already, even though they don't have kids, they're thinking very seriously in this culture, which
mhm,
is dramatically different than the culture I was raised in.
right.
It's a very daunting thing to figure out how somebody born today is going to keep their faith intact. If we're
Mm,
already at an 86% failure rate, I can't imagine what the next 20 years are going to look like.
mm,
So, it's really important to find the right schools. And it's important, I think, for all the bishops in the country when there's an opening in superintendent or an opening in principal, there's a chance, if you have a chance to replace a lukewarm person with somebody who has missionary zeal,
mhm,
it's there is no logic that would suggest that you could be indifferent to the outcome of that decision. So
mhm.
it's really important.
Yeah.
So I helped 3 people become superintendent just in the last year, did it for free on the side, just had good candidates and there were some good openings. One of them was San Francisco. A person got hired by Archbishop Cordileone. So
Mhm,
my new project, which is the Catholic Talent Project, so over 5 years, we're going to get involved in 10 dioceses and help them recruit wherever they have openings, from superintendent, principal openings, and teacher openings, and do a very concentrated effort. So over 5 years, 10 dioceses. Next year, we're doing recruiting for Boston and San Francisco. I joke with San Francisco, like it's got to be, from a Catholic perspective, the most satanic place on the planet. But it's
mhm,
a challenging place. Boston's a challenging place to do this kind of work as well. But
mhm,
the reason I'm intrigued by it, other than I'm a huge admirer of Archbishop Cordileone and the new superintendent, and all the people on his senior staff, I think are spectacular. If you can do this in San Francisco
mhm.
successfully, there's no bishop in the country has an excuse for not doing it,
Yeah.
because it is the most difficult culture that you could possibly imagine for doing this work.
Mhm,
And Archbishop Cordileone's got 7 years left before he turns 75.
mm,
And I think he's very serious about doing as much as he can, to kind of swing for the fences on this and
mhm,
do it with, a good amount of prudential judgment along the way.
Mm,
but he's taken this very seriously. So we look forward to working with him
mm,
as well as continuing our work in Boston.
yeah. It sounds from what you're speaking of that you're extremely optimistic about the future of the church and also the future of young men and women who are going to be touched by these young men and women, coming out of college and stepping into leadership roles, especially in Catholic education. For you, let's do your swing for the fences goal. What is your great hope of the long-term fruit that you hope might result from this project occurring across the country?
Yeah, so I'm optimistic, but at the same time, I have very clear set of eyes on what our challenges are.
Mhm,
I believe that if we keep doing it the way we're doing it, and having an 86, you, I think if you have an 86% failure rate, 86% people don't believe in what the Catholic
mhm,
Church teaches by the time they're 18. The church, I think, risks if they don't follow what I'm advising, literally going the way of Europe. And I don't mean that as a compliment,
right.
in which there's virtually, you'll have small pockets of faith, which we've always had. But writ large, people are going to walk away. If you can't get kids to stay with the faith, there's going to be nothing, people my age and up, eventually we're all going to be dead, right? So
Mhm,
you have to have constantly, the church has to be refreshed with the energy of faithful young people. And right now, we're losing too many of them. And so I think, we're going to be left with churches like in Europe that there'd be backdrops for nice, beautiful backdrops for weddings, for
mhm,
people who may or may not be serious about practicing the faith. And it'll be great for cute Instagram photos for tourists that happen to be walking by, but there won't
mhm,
be a lot of faith going on in them. So I think this is literally a battle for the ages.
mhm.
Monsignor Shea, who's president of University
Yeah.
of Mary up in Bismarck, has a book, From Christendom to the
Mhm.
Apostolic Age. That's roughly the title. I may have it a little wrong, but
No, you're
available
right
on
on.
Amazon, another place. It's my favorite. I've bought so many copies I've handed out to people. But the point being, we're no longer in the age of Christendom in which people accept our basic premises. So when you have, even a lot of teachers in Catholic schools don't believe in Humanae Vitae forward, and increasingly in the last few years don't even believe in Genesis, that there is such a thing as a man and a woman. Things are getting pretty far gone. So that's the five alarm fire that I think we have to pay attention to. So I'm not optimistic that if we just do it the way we're doing it, that things are going to turn out well. I
Right.
think it's going to be a disaster. What I'm optimistic about is when I go on college campuses around this country and I see the priests that were inspired to become priests by JP2 and
Mhm.
Benedict, and now in our seminaries in Boston roughly 80% of our seminarians are homeschooled, which is a
Yeah.
staggering development. But
Mhm.
we get virtually no vocations from 23 high schools that we run. So all the activities happening, not all, I'm exaggerating a little, but like a lot of the faithful activities happening in a homeschool environment. It doesn't, and I'm a supporter of parents doing that, but we should be able to do that in Catholic schools too.
Mhm.
And so that's so I think if people take talent seriously and understand that if we're trying to bring kids back to God, they need to see a witness in the classroom every day. And we actually do that. I think, we have, I should stop for a moment. We have 1.6 million kids still in Catholic schools. That's down a lot from 5 million in 1965. But that's still a lot of people.
Mhm.
Jesus started with 12 and one betrayed him. So if he could have started with 1.6 million people, right? So we have a really strong, like these are kids that are just sitting in our classrooms. So we just need to make sure that they have the right inspiration and that
Mhm.
we're giving them a quality education. And
Mhm.
the other thing we have to make sure is that we look at the curriculum. Is God at the center of our curriculum? If the only time religion comes up or Catholicism is in religion class, and the
Mhm.
Catholic intellectual tradition isn't woven throughout the whole day, then we're basically telegraphing to the kids while we're saying put God at the center of your life that we're not putting God at the center of our life. If like
Mhm.
your faith is only going to church once a week and that's the only thing that you do that reflects your Catholic faith, then you're really not having a fully alive faith. And
Mhm.
so kids need to understand that. And it has to permeate everything they do, but it starts with them seeing lots of examples. If
Mhm.
I may, just one other point, which is most of the people teaching in elementary schools are women. Now, I
Mm,
like women. I even married one, even though that's
okay.
not particularly trendy these days. But I've been married 39 years, which is even more unusual. But the it's really important that we have more examples for kids of men down on their knees praying.
Mhm,
And the church without the contributions of Catholic women would not exist. And
mhm,
that's in like every aspect of the existence of the church. And the Catholic schools would not exist. It was not for the disproportionate influence and role and sacrifice made by religious sisters, but also by lay women as well. But at the same time, we have an awful large percentage of kids that come through our schools that have literally never seen a man on his knees praying.
mhm,
And it's because their parents might not be religious. It could be because they're a product of divorce and nobody's going to church anymore. It could be nobody in the family ever believed in anything. But given that in diocesan schools, we have kind of a mixed group of people coming in, it's really, really important for young boys to see manly examples of faith every single day that they're in school. And so I've joked, I've become a fisher of men, but I've made a particular effort while I'm out there recruiting of trying to convince guys to step up to the plate
mhm,
and be examples for younger people. When I go in classrooms for people that I've recruited who are guys who, to use an old fashioned phrase, like guys, but just have a lot of charisma and personality. I joke, I'm looking for people who look like they could play rugby, even if they don't. And I
right.
say this is a completely non-athletic person. But I look at the boys and without them saying it out loud or maybe even realizing it, they're looking at those male teachers and saying in their head, subliminally, they're saying, boy, I wish you were my older brother. I wish you were my dad. And
Mhm,
that's not all cases. Lots of people coming from intact families, which they have great role models, but there's a very large number of kids who do not.
yeah.
And I say when I'm talking to audiences of women who think I'm picking on women, I'm not. I'm going like, at some point, you're going to want your daughter to marry somebody who's faithful and have a
Mhm,
good role model for everybody in the family to, to join their daughters. And it's slim pickings out there for people who are trying to marry off their daughters. And
mhm,
so we need to increase the number of men who take their faith seriously and to
mhm.
use their witness to influence the next generation.
Amen. What have you found to be the most challenging or rewarding on your own spiritual journey, in your work that you've been doing, especially with the Catholic Talent Project?
I think the inspiration of it's the paradox of and I complain like most people my age and higher about this generation coming up, but at the same time, there's this group of young Catholics that are the most spectacularly faithful people of any age that I've met in my life. And
Mhm,
that gives me hope for the future. At the
mm,
same time, the priests say roughly 60 and under. And this is happening now. I've asked all over the country. It's happening. It's a phenomenon everywhere in which people don't. A couple years ago, I was calculating that somebody entering sixth grade, that by the time they were born, so now would be somebody entering eighth grade, that Pope John Paul II had already passed away.
mhm,
So we have the risk of a generation coming up that, like for you or I, he was just this monumental figure,
mhm,
not just for the church, for world history, the fate of Europe and everything, right? And for a lot of kids now, he's becoming almost like a historic, like the way I would talk about Winston Churchill, like a
right.
distant figure, right? And it's hard to imagine that a lot of kids don't know who John Paul II is. A lot of
Mhm,
people don't know what, his work on theology of the body. And
mm,
so we have to, but his biggest impact, I think, was the number of people he inspired to become priests. And
mhm,
that's a legacy and he has his theological contributions are among the most
mhm,
significant in the last 500 years,
yeah.
but among the most significant for sure, right? So but the impact of this generation of priests coming along is amazing. So I say to people, my job at my age is my job is to make sure that people older than me don't destroy the church before people younger than me save it. And I think we're at this pivot moment in which the cavalry is coming. And that's why people should like hang in there. If we could
Mhm.
just make sure that things don't get too much worse, the people, all the priests that JP2 and Benedict, et cetera, have inspired, are going to be among the most spectacular priests this country's ever seen. And once they're a little older and they take over all the leadership positions in the country, this church is going to be much more focused on evangelizing, and it just will be. I think there's a chance for a spectacular renewal. And so
Mhm.
right now we have, at the college level, you think of all the Cardinal Newman colleges, and that part's locked down. But we need to take those Cardinal Newman colleges and look at their praxis and what's working and why parents like them so much, and view them as an example for the rest of the world on what needs to be done, not just in higher education, but also in preschool through 12th grade. Those
Mhm.
schools have done an excellent job trying to maintain the faith of the children who show up in their schools, for college. And we
Mhm.
need to make sure that from preschool all the way through the end of college, it's basically like a relay race, and we're dropping the baton like every other grade, and that's not a way to win a race. So
Yeah.
we need to get a lot more talented people on the field that truly believe and are not frankly apologetic. I mean, I'm tired. I'm not going to
Yeah.
apologize about being Catholic. Like, we created the most amazing intellectual tradition in the history of the world. We created Western culture. We have the biggest global footprint in serving the poor, the dispossessed, and the marginalized. There's no reason any young Catholic should be looking down their at the ground, embarrassed to be Catholic. There's a lot, and I'm not calling for people not to have humility,
Mhm.
but there's a lot there that been of service to the entire, not just to Catholics, but we've been a beacon of light for the entire world and for people of all faith. And that's something that it's a travesty that kids can go, when they can go through Catholic schools and not even be taught that in a Catholic school, or to
Mhm.
go through Catholic schools and not to be taught about JP2.
Yeah.
There's no excuse for it.
Yeah.
It
Absolutely
can be
right.
fixed. So we're
Yeah.
hoping when we recruit people through Catholic Talent Project, that will be an example for other bishops to see what they can do in their own diocese. It's all open source, meaning this is no secret sauce. There's nothing proprietary. I want people to copy everything that we do. And I'm
Mhm.
willing to help people and tell them how we're doing what we're doing, because I think it's pretty straightforward.
Mhm.
Um, but I think people out there, there's a lot. I think every grandparent that I've ever met is, worried about what's going to happen with their grandkids in terms of faith. And
Yeah.
it's really challenging. But there is a path forward.
Yep, there definitely is. And so I would be amiss if I was not to ask, where can people go and learn more to be able to get in touch with you if they want some help or to just be seeing what you guys are doing? Mhm.
Sure. So we have a website, as you can see from the name
Mhm.
behind me, CatholicTalentProject.org,
Mhm.
ORG at the end. And you can go on there, and it's all of a week old. And
Mhm.
my contact information is on there. My personal contact information is on there. So you
Mhm.
can, if you go on the top bar and on the right, it says contact, and you
Mhm.
can just explain what your question is, and then either I'll follow up or somebody else with the Catholic Talent Project will. And then
Mhm.
just spread the word. And anybody who's listening who has a soon to be college graduate, we're looking for seniors, in particular college seniors. And if your kid doesn't know what they want to do, and you don't want them sleeping in your basement for the next 10 years, I joke, I'm going to become the Full Employment Act for unemployed liberal arts majors.
There
So
you
I hire
go.
a lot of philosophy and theology majors because they have thought about the most serious questions. Who am I? Who created me? How do we get here? And all those kinds of things where people in other majors won't necessarily. But I don't care what the major is. I don't care if they've ever been to education school. But if you have a
Mhm.
grandchild or a son or a daughter who you think has the personality and the inclination to become a teacher, probably 90% of the people I've recruited never plan on becoming a teacher. And
Mhm.
then when I explain why we're doing it and what the mission is and ask them to strap on their cross, people are stepping forward and doing it. So if there's somebody in your family, could be niece, nephew, grandchild, whatever it is, direct them to the site. There is a tab on the site for the St. Thomas More Teaching Fellowship. And that's the entry point really to first start out as a teacher. And then we then will cultivate their talents if they have leadership ability. I've made people principals as young as 25, 26, 27. and I've helped people get jobs all across the country. So we're going to be focused on San Francisco and Boston, but I've also helped people get placed. I know people all over the country. I help people get placed in schools all over the place.
Awesome. You've given me so much hope and encouragement, and I'm excited to be able to pass the word in the way that I'm able to do so right now. And so I can't thank you enough for your time, Tom. We have, geez, it's there's just so much work that needs to be done. But we start where we can, and then we build from there, and we trust the Holy Spirit to do what we can't do ourselves because he's the one who's in charge anyway. But thank you for all that you're doing and for the opportunity that you are providing through your work for our church and for our young people, to come. Thank you again.
Thank you
But
and God bless.
not at all. So for everyone out there, you got your marching orders. You know what you need to be doing. You need to be pointing people towards the Catholic Talent Project. You need to be speaking about what the possibilities are when we are able to have fully Catholic, authentic leadership and what that can do, how that can transform our world. So keep doing whatever it takes so that together we can tell the master of death, not today. God bless everybody.